You do not need to be creative to write good job ads. You just don't.
Meet Mitch Sullivan, founder of Copywriting for Recruiters and an expert at copywriting. In this episode of the Recruiting Better podcast, Mitch shares his tactical advice for recruiters looking to improve their job adverts and their messaging.
All you need to do is to tell the reader right from the get-go why this job might be better.
Mitch is a master at copywriting and explained his tricks of the trade, including
write the job ad as if you were writing to one person. The only way I know to combat attention fatigue is to write things that people are more likely to want to at least start reading.
Listen in to find out how to totally transform your job adverts and your messaging, listening to tactical advice from a master in his trade.
Welcome back to another episode of Recruiting Better with me, Ben Browning, and this time I'm joined by the inimitable Mitch Sullivan. Mitch has been working with recruiters, training and developing their copywriting skills for over 10 years, and prior to that, both a recruiter and retained recruitment coach and executive search guide to a number of recruiters. Mitch has built an enviable position on LinkedIn with an amazing following and an incredible volume of recommendations and referrals of people who've been through his course and experienced his work. Mitch's mission, it seems, is to arm every recruiter, be they an internal recruiter or working in a recruitment agency, with the skills of copywriting, which have never been more important. Mitch, it's a delight and pleasure to welcome you to the show.
Thank you, Ben. That was some intro. There's a lot to live up to. Thanks.
Well, I'm sure over the next 45 minutes, everyone will see exactly why I'm able to heap such praise upon you, because I'm sure some of the people listening, many of the people who are listening will have seen your content on LinkedIn, heard you on other podcasts, heard you in conversation in the past. So today is going to be another opportunity for you to share a little bit more about what it means to be an excellent copywriter as a recruiter in this current kind of state, and also to touch on a new project that you're working on currently, I believe, around how recruiters can start that process with the tools of an excellent job briefing. So I'm really grateful for you to be here. And I mentioned this idea of copywriting skills being so important right now. And I wonder if we can start with that question. You know, why is it you feel that copywriting skills in today's market, in today's climate, are so critical for recruiters?
Well, the obvious comparison is when I first came into the industry, which was right at the back end of the 80s, like 89, I think it was. I didn't have to write anything. I had to write 3 job ads a week, and they were literally like 100-word job ads that went in as a composite half pager in like something like the Grocer or whatever, Every single candidate and every single client engagement happened over the phone. Literally everything. And that's no longer the case. Yeah, everything. Technology has moved us to a place now where pretty much every piece of comms with either of those two groups of people starts from the keyboard. So logically, one would deduce that being able to construct sentences that people are going to want to read has become more important than it's ever been.
Yeah, absolutely. So we're seeing, aren't we, all of that, as you say, communication coming through from the keyboard. You know, it's fascinating to me that it's a skill that recruiters perhaps haven't taken quite as seriously, maybe, as they might over that intervening period, which, as you say, is some time now. I've got
a theory. Sorry to interrupt you, Ben, but I've got a theory around why that might be, actually.
Would you share it?
Yeah. I've been around recruitment now long enough to have seen 2 different eras, the pre-internet age and the post-internet age, basically. And boy, do I wish I had been younger when the internet age had come along. I really do. Because, it just works for me on so many levels. But when that happened, and when that really started to happen was with the advent of job boards, which was really the early 2000s when that came along as a thing. And when did the main one that I remember is Monster, but there were several. And back then, posting a copy of the client's job description worked. And it worked because the novelty of people being able to find jobs really, really quickly, as opposed to having to go out and buy some kind of physical publication, and then flick through those pages and look at display ads and lineage ads to some extent. The novelty was too great, and so people would respond. They didn't care. They just looked at a job where they would read it or skim read it, get a gist of it, and think, yeah, that's, and they would respond accordingly. But as time has gone on, things change. People's attitudes towards things change, and they often change without anyone really realizing it or pinpointing why. And change normally happens slowly, organically, rather than, very, very rarely do we turn a corner in recruitment. We tend to turn bends, rather than sharp corners. I just think people, aka candidates, have grown jaded of the kind of stuff that they read online about jobs, and I think it's partly influenced by their lived experiences with recruitment, be it agency or in-house, which isn't always positive, unfortunately, for whatever reasons, and I think some of the reasons for that are leveled at recruiters are a little bit unfair. Some of them aren't. So I just think, rather like a frog being boiled in water, no one's really noticed. It just happens so gradually. I just think it's just become the norm. This is how you post a job ad. Is what often gets said to trainees when they're in their first month or two in a business. And this is how we've always done it. And with the declining or diminishing returns, recruiters tend to have a habit of blaming either the tech platform or the candidates.
Yeah, we see that, don't we? We see that. And I think you're absolutely right. That kind of accountability and responsibility for, the question that I always ask is, and it kind of runs contrary to that perception of this is the way we've always done it. It's like, if we were starting today, if we were doing, heard this phrase recently, zero-based accounting, right? Which is basically kind of financial term, which means that you will start your budget going into the new year, rather than starting by thinking, right, what have we got and what do we need to continue and what do we need to pare back? Saying, actually, you know what, if we started tomorrow, if we started the new year with no costs at all, if we got rid of everything we pay for as a business and then only adopted the things that we really critically use, how will we approach that? And I take a similar kind of approach the way I think about all of the techniques and tools and strategies we use in recruitment.
Yeah, totally agree. That's a good way of putting it, actually. There's a good way of putting it, good way of phrasing it or framing it, rather. Yeah.
The other thing that came to mind as you were talking about that kind of shift, that kind of pre-internet to, during or post the invention or creation or popularization, perhaps we should say, of the internet, is also for me this idea of the attention economy. It's so much harder to get people's attention today for a variety of reasons, but it feels as though every channel that we use is overpopulated and often full of spam. So why is copywriting an important skill against that backdrop?
Getting attention is critical. Yeah. People only have so much of it. People are bombarded with marketing messages. I seem to remember Jackie once saying that people today receive more marketing messages in a day than our grandparents received in a lifetime, or saw in a lifetime.
Believe it, yeah.
Yeah. And the more you think about that, the more you think, Christ, what is that doing to us as a species? Yeah. And I don't have the answer to that question. That's way above my pay grade. But the only way I know to combat attention fatigue is to write things that people are more likely to want to at least start reading. Yeah. And the biggest mistake everybody makes in job marketing is it's almost this obsession with talking about themselves. I mean, I get it I subscribe to quite a lot of newsletters and things, not because I'm interested in them, or I just want to see what the email marketing looks like. Yeah. And 90% of them start with something like, I would like to. Yeah. And job ads are the same. It's like most job ads are just a recreation of the job description. And the job description, by definition, is what I would call a demand document. It just demands certain things of the reader. You'll be doing this, you'll be doing that, you do it in this way, you report to this, you'll have this budget, whatever it is. And that's only going to attract the attention of people who desperately need another job. And in most economies, most economic passages that we live through are not recessions. They're just not. We have them from time to time. We're probably in one now. But when we're not in a recession, most people in most jobs that require some recruitment expertise to fill, most people are in a job. So if they look at a job ad, and a lot do, they're looking either out of curiosity because they're just wondering whether there might be something better out there than what they're already doing. And if you don't start telling them why the job you're advertising might be better than the one that they're in, then there's the massive chance they're not going to keep reading. So yeah, I've always said this, and I do this a lot in the one-to-one coaching I do, and I've done hundreds of these now the last 3 years, is I focus with nearly all of them on, you've got to probably spend 70% of your time and thinking on the first 150 words of the job ad. Yeah. Regardless of whether the ad ends up being 300 words or 500 words, the first 150 words are critical, because if you get somebody interested in the job within the first 150 words, and you do that by telling them what's in it for them, how they might benefit, how the job might be better, then they'll probably read the whole thing because they've invested. So it's absolutely, so yeah, that attention economy thing is really, really important, particularly to recruiters, actually.
Yeah, indeed. No, I think that's a great breakdown. Can I ask you just a technical question? Do you think there's an ideal kind of length for a job advert? You kind of gave that range, but
yeah, I do. Ideal. I don't like the word ideal, but typically, the more junior the job, the less the word count. The more senior job, the bigger the word count. The more senior roles, if you're looking for a sales director and a sales director sees that ad, they'll probably read it, if only because they don't see that many ads for sales directors. Yeah, particularly at a certain salary level, let's say you sort of 120, 150K.
Yeah, right.
But you still can't bore them to death because they'll click away. Yeah, but you probably don't need to work quite as hard. But most jobs are somewhere in the middle of, yeah. So I would say for a junior role, it depends. I mean, some junior roles, like if you were running an ad for a trainee recruiter and you were looking for somebody who the only qualification was they've got some kind of work experience and they've got a sales personality, yeah, and or maybe a degree, although I think that's somewhat outdated as well. Then
yeah, indeed,
you may need to spend more time telling them what the job of a recruiter is. So you may need to break it down, which will up the word count. But in general, 250 to 300 words. I think optimum 350 to 400. But some more senior or complex roles, I think the biggest ad I've ever put out was 700 words. But that's rare. It's rare that a job ad needs to go over 500 for me. So somewhere between 300 and 500, I would say.
Okay. Excellent. How does that, out of interest, compare the typical length of? I mean, I'm sure there's a real range, but how does that typically compare to the sorts of adverts that people are writing before you start working with them?
Most. I mean, there are some you can tell are already trying to make an attempt at selling the job, and most of them that fall into that category do so by talking about the company. And this kind of connects back to the taking of the job brief, because I think a lot of recruiters, when taking a job brief, will just listen and take notes, not ask that many questions, certainly not ask any difficult questions, and they'll take whatever is told to them as gospel, and they'll take that to market. And it's my client is, or we are growing, doing this, revolutionizing this, changing the world, whatever it might be. Our people are great. Our culture is awesome. And some of that may land, but it's as I've said many, many times before, it's like going out on a date and the other person just talking about how hot they think they are. You know, you're probably going to get bored within 20 minutes. Most will just lean very heavily on the job description. And I think they do that because most think that the stature of the company is the most important thing that people are interested in, whether they're passive or active as candidates. They think, well, that's the first thing people are going to want to know, and it just isn't. It's the second thing they want to know. First thing they want to know is how the job might be better, how what they'll be doing at that company is going to be more interesting, more rewarding than other jobs like it. Most that try are doing it by talking about the company. The rest are just leaning on the job description and maybe sprinkling it with some adjectives like exciting, fantastic, innovative, that kind of thing. And it's I used to think learning how to write a decent job ad was easy, but time has taught me that most recruiters don't find it that easy, because they've particularly those that have been in the business 5 or more years, they get in habits that can become somewhat indelible. And with younger, less experienced recruiters, there's far less to unpack in terms of bad habits. But yeah, the biggest mistake they make is talking about the job from their perspective or the client's perspective rather than the candidate's.
Yeah, I hear you. You mentioned a moment ago that one of the things that, in particular, you gave the example of a role for a junior recruiter ad or a new entrant to the recruitment market, for example. I think that sounded as though it was just one example of a time when you might do this. But you said in that type of advert, you might spend some time describing what the role actually is and describing, and that made me instantly think, so should an advert be trying to put people off applying? And I just wonder what the role of disqualification in a job advert is and where you see that playing a part.
Okay. Disqualifying candidates, I think, is an advanced tactic. I don't think people that are new to putting out proper job adverts as opposed to glorified job descriptions should try and tackle that until they've got some mastery over the art of attraction. Yeah. But I think if we're just honest about the job, which I know is not always easy because some clients are sort of nervous about complete honesty, or some companies, I should say. I think people, if you've got them wanting to read the ad, so I go back to those first 150 words, if that's attracted someone and aroused their curiosity, and if we can then assume that they'll probably read the whole thing, because the job ad is never that long anyway. I mean, 500 words isn't that long. I mean, what does it take to read 500 words? A minute and a half, 2 minutes? I can't remember, but 2 minutes, I think. Then people will disqualify themselves. So if in that example that we've raised, it says, you'll need to make 20 cold calls a day, that will disqualify some people who don't want to do that, and some people won't. I'm nervous about disqualifying people. I think let's get good at attracting them first before we start doing that, basically.
Yeah.
Winning high quality new business is more difficult than ever. And as you know, we are strong advocates of using email in your BD outreach. But we also know that using email outreach campaigns is more and more difficult. Google and Yahoo have upped the bar in terms of what they consider to be spam, and so working to create great results from email campaigns is more and more difficult. And if you're sending messages at volume from your primary domain, you really need to be worried about domain health. Not to mention the fact that only the most hyper-relevant, hyper-tailored content is going to get the kinds of responses you want from your clients. Our partner Outstation does all of the heavy lifting for you. It's an amazing tool that runs end-to-end services from data collection through segmentation through using AI to really target and get specific about who you're sending messages to is a real game changer in terms of the way that we use both a combination of technology and that human touch. Outstation goes a level beyond anything that we've ever seen before. And we've got clients all over the world in different sectors across recruitment who are getting fantastic results just from using the tools at Outstation. If you want to check it out, head to the show notes. There's a link there for you. And if you go through to their page, they will give you 15% off a discount from your first order. So go check out Outstation, change your results from your email campaigns, and it'll help you win more business.
And I wonder if in what you've said there, it also sounds as though if we're specific in how we attract people, we also, as a result of that, don't attract the people who we'd otherwise want to disqualify, right? So the process of attraction is actually disqualification as well, because if we're painting a picture that's designed to attract a certain type of people, it by very design will also not attract others.
Yeah, I think we have to. I've always worked on the assumption that whoever I'm writing for, be it other recruiters on LinkedIn or candidates in job ads or messaging sequences, I just always try and talk up to them and just assume them to be intelligent. And in the case of job marketing, yeah, you have to assume that most people will not respond to a job ad that isn't what they want to do. A lot of people do, but I think that's caused by them not reading the ad in the first place.
Yeah.
So I shouldn't even call it a job ad. It's a job post. If it's not selling the job, it's a job post. If it is selling the job, it's a job ad. Sorry to sound geeky about this, but it's just how.
It's such an important definition, though, Mitch, and I think this comes to the crux of the work you do, right? And it's also, lots of the work that I do is also helping recruiters with their business development, and the same thing goes. And I remember being in a training room many years ago, where we were practicing our cold calls, we were practicing talking to clients, and I had a great manager at the time, and he said to me, in this role play, he said, "Ben, everything you've told me in the last 2 minutes, I could have read on your website. Why are you calling me?"
Right.
And I stopped. And that was the moment when I realized that actually everything I'm doing in my pitch, everything I'm doing in my pitch deck, everything I'm telling my client about why they should trust me and why they should believe in me, in the age where every client, everybody who's going to a meeting with someone they're potentially going to buy from, that buyer has already looked at the website. There's no point in regurgitating the information that's on the website. The thing that you have to do in that sales conversation is make that information relevant for the individual, in the same way that specific candidate-focused outreach should be talking about why that opportunity is specifically relevant for the candidate, not just generically about the opportunity. Yeah. But again, there's this level of distinction between what is an advert, what is a post, what is a description, what is and what is a marketing message or a kind of a value statement, and then what is a piece of information or a dialogue that the person you're talking to is actually going to get excited about. And maybe excited is actually the wrong word here. Just engaged by.
I was going to pull you up on that actually. That word.
Yeah, I've done my preparation. I've got it up here.
Yeah, there's a lot of hyperbole in marketing in general, but especially in recruitment. Another way you could characterize the difference between the two, between an ad and a job ad and a job post, is a job post will have information, a job ad will have insight. And insight is the next evolution from information. What does that information mean? What does it mean to you? How will that play out? And that's what people really want to know if they're going to make any kind of value judgment about whether to want to find out more about that job. Too much of what I read in job posts assumes that people are going to join the dots up as to we're growing. First of all, are they going to believe it? And think, well, what does that mean? What does that mean to this particular job? Is that going to make this job harder or more enjoyable or easier? In some cases it'll be harder. But, you've got to talk about, what does that growth mean? What's the target for the next year? How much have you grown in the last 2 years? How has that happened? What have you done to make that happen? That's what people most want to know, and that's what's sadly lacking in, I would say, 95% of job posts that I see.
Yeah. I think when people did go through that process as well of looking at what they've written and actually looking at what they've written with a critical eye, this is part of your process, isn't it? When you look back at the adverts they've written and look at their competitors and do that analysis.
I use a situational analogy with recruiters that I'm having sort of serious conversations with about this. And one way to sort of characterize this, well, I've got numerous ways, but one way is, imagine you're filling a job, doesn't matter what that job is, and you're in the process of trying to fill it, and you happen to be at a party one night, and you overhear someone talking about their job to someone else, and you think, my God, that person could be the ideal candidate for this job I'm trying to fill. So you find an excuse to go and talk to them, and you say, look, I overheard you talking about your job, blah, blah, blah. I'm a recruiter. I happen to be working on a job as a blah, 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 that I think you might be interested in. And the other person says to you, oh, okay, why do you think I might be interested? Then whatever you say to that person next is what needs to be in the first 150 words of your job ad. It's as simple as that. Because what you wouldn't do at that party is start reciting the responsibilities or start talking about how the company are turning over this and blah, blah. Yeah, you just wouldn't.
Yeah.
You think, well, yeah, why would he be interested? And that's the question that everyone wants an answer to as quickly as possible.
Yeah, absolutely. So do you have a framework you can share, or a bit of obviously this is your work, so you might not want to share all of the secret sauce. I wouldn't encourage you to.
There's no secret sauce. There's no secret sauce.
How does a recruiter go about writing an advert that captures that attention, that creates that moment of interest, and then builds to them taking action?
Our Copywriting for Recruiters training course is built around AIDA, attention, interest, desire, action. That's been around for over 100 years. It's been the basic DNA of all forms of direct response advertising for over 100 years. Digital tech, as you could have added another layer to that, which is the how would you call it? I can't think of the term, but some kind of social affirmation. Other people have said this about this company or this job, which could also work in that sort of 4-tier process. But an even simpler decoding of AIDA is 2 stages, which is sell and tell. A job ad, first half of the ad, you sell the job. You tell the reader everything you think they might want to know about why this job might be good for them. And it's not going to land with everybody, but if you don't tell them, nobody can start to get interested. And then once you've done that and they're still reading, and like I said, they'll read the rest once they've read halfway down an ad. They'll read the whole thing because they've made an investment. All you have to do in the second half of the ad is tell them a bit about the job. And if you're looking for someone experienced, you don't need to tell them too much about how that job is done because most of them will know, or all of them should know. So a bit about what they'll be doing, a bit about the company. But again, if you're an in-house recruiter, you don't need to put anything about the company because if someone's interested in the job, the very next thing they'll do is they'll go to your website, your LinkedIn page, and they'll look at who you are, what you do, and they'll click the links that they most want to know things about. So let them control that rather than you just putting another sort of 150 words in all about the company. And they want to know, probably the most important part in the second half of the job ad is what they'll need. What they need to have to qualify. And again, in most job postings, there's an impossibly long list of criteria that they put, and it's like a wish list. It's like the ideal candidate, which we all know doesn't exist. I've rarely ever gone to market with more than 3 candidate requirements. And they're never soft skills, ever. They're always based around knowledge or experience, basically. So you can see a job ad in 2 halves. Sell in the top half, tell in the second half, and then tell them what to do next. So it's just tell them about the job, tell them what they'll be doing, tell them about the company, tell them what they need, tell them what they need to do next.
Simple as that.
Too many job posts are just tell the whole way through.
Yeah, indeed. So if it seems at face value quite simple, that idea of sell and then tell, why is it recruiters struggle with it so much in terms of what is it recruiters need to learn to get better at doing this? If the structure and the framework is relatively intuitive, then...
Well, that's a really big question. I'm not sure I'm going to do it justice. I'll have a run at it. But I think too many recruiters have grown up in an environment where job advertising is seen as a function of admin. Mm-hmm. I think too many recruiters don't ever put themselves in the mindset of the target candidate. Another piece of advice I would give people: write the job ad as if you were writing to one person. So you imagine somebody who could do the job, who's got the skills you're looking for. You imagine that they're in a job that they don't need to leave. They might be getting a little bit bored with it, for however long they've been doing it, which is why they're casually looking at a job ad from time to time, and they happen to see yours. Just write what they're going to most want to know and just write it to them. Everything comes back to the reader. It always, so they don't put themselves in the mindset of the reader, the candidate. It's almost like there's a subconscious belief amongst recruiters that if they're looking at a job ad, they must want another job. It's just not true. I read a stat years ago, and I have no reason to think it's changed significantly since then. I say years ago, 5 years ago, from a marketing automation company, quite a big one. Can't remember what they're called now. But anyway, according to their data, 60% of all job board traffic is from people who are looking to improve their situation in some way. Mm-hmm. So if you're not speaking to those people, that's a huge chunk of the pie that you're not getting access to. Really,
that makes you wonder what the other 32% are doing as well. But it's also a really valid point. And I think the thing is, that's job boards, right? The more and more jobs that we see posted on social media, there must be an incredible volume of people seeing job adverts that aren't even that are just on social media for entertainment value. And of course, they may be the harder kind of portion of the market to motivate to take action. But we certainly have greater reach to passive candidates than ever before, don't we?
I'm going to post what I'm about to tell you on LinkedIn sometime this week. But I had a chap contact me, send me some DMs on LinkedIn Friday, was it Thursday, Friday, who came on the course. Blimey, it must have been 6-7 years ago. And I remember him, he actually said the course gave him his mojo back, actually, because it added a new dimension to his job that I think it was lacking. So, he's one of those people that's really grasped this and taken it on board and allowed it to colour almost every aspect of his job. But he posted quite... And he posted a job ad. I was almost going to call it creative, but it actually wasn't creative. It was just clever. It was just clever in how he structured it and the theme that he used. And I'm not going to get into the detail of what it was, but
sure.
He showed me a response from one of the candidates and I responded saying, I love it when that happens. And it's happened to me loads of times. It's happened to lots of recruiters that I know. When a candidate comes back to you and says something along the lines of, I'm not really looking, but I saw your job ad, and I'm interested, that validates everything. But, and he said to me, I've had more than one of these as well for this particular job. And I said, could you send me the others as well? Because I might even turn it into a carousel, And he did, and some of them were people that saying they weren't interested, but were saying, wow, that is such a good ad, I'd like to keep in touch. Mm-hmm. And isn't that the secondary benefit of putting out proper job ads, is that, other people are seeing them, people that aren't ready to buy yet, candidates that aren't ready to move yet, but they think, oh, that's an interesting recruiter, or that's an interesting agency, and they remember you. Or a client who thinks, wow, the agency I use aren't posting ads like that. I perhaps need to be talking to these guys. So it has it has a residual marketing effect as well, which I think a lot of recruiters pay no attention to or don't even think about.
Yeah. I saw on LinkedIn this very morning a post from a recruitment leader saying that candidates should build relationships with recruiters when they're not looking for a role. I support that message, but it's on the recruiter to make the relationship worthwhile, right? We can't simply tell people to say, "Oh, you know what you should do, candidates? You should come and knock on our door and see how we're doing." It's like, no, we need to be presenting something to the market that candidates want to engage with, people want to engage with, whether or not they're looking to hire, looking for a new job, or anything else.
Totally agree. I love how some recruiters seem to enjoy offloading the responsibility to the candidate rather than themselves, which is essentially what you're saying. And on that same theme, I've seen, particularly this year, loads of recruiters putting out advice on how candidates should sell themselves in their CV, which is so ironic given that everything we've just talked about for the last 10 or 15 minutes. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. You can imagine in the good old days, a recruiter getting a letter back saying, "I'll improve the quality of my CV when you improve the quality of your job advert." Right?
Yeah, and I think that would be a valid comment. Absolutely.
Yeah, indeed. Okay, cool. So we've got this relatively simple structure of sell and tell, or using AIDA: attention, interest, desire, and action. We understand the value and the importance of creating great job adverts, using great copywriting skills, or not even great copywriting skills, but competent copywriting skills to be able to start a narrative, a message that people want to read. And we know, because of the mass volume of these job posts rather than job adverts, that a job advert stands out a mile, especially on a job board. You mentioned that difference, and it was interesting that you noted that there wasn't necessarily a huge amount of creativity that went into the results that your former the person that you trained historically had used, but they were clever, they were smart, they'd done it in an effective way. So we don't need to be creative to be effective.
Absolutely not. And it's one of the big misnomers about copyright, particularly copywriting recruitment, but in general, actually, about this mystical, talent of being creative. I mean, how do you even define what creativity is? You do not need to be creative to write good job ads. You just don't. It helps for sure, because it's one way of grabbing attention is by starting your ad with something that nobody would expect to read at the top of a job ad. But there's got to be a payoff to that opener. It's got to make sense. It's got to be justified. If it's not, it's just clickbait. So yeah, it's creativity is not needed. All you need to do is to tell the reader right from the get-go why this job might be better. And I've had people push back to me on that. Go, well, you can't do that. How are you going to know what the reader's important to them? Of course, it's just guesswork. I said, well, no, it's not guesswork. If the client is telling you these are the things about this job that people might be interested in, and then you unpackage of them. So what does it mean? What does it look like? What would it mean to them? How long might that take for them to get there? And how big is the budget that they'll get for their training? All these kind of things that you think, right, and once you've identified them, then you turn them into benefits in your job ad. Yeah, I mean, one of the basic component parts of selling is turning features into benefits, as you well know. But equally, transposing that over to messaging, because people get a little bit confused about messaging. And most of the messages I've seen, and probably you've seen as well, don't get read because they're too long. I mean, your opening message is 300 words and it's from a recruiter and it's got an attached job description to it. Most people are just going to think, fuck that, seriously, edit that out if you need to. But why would they read 300 words from a stranger, particularly a recruiter they don't know? And why would they open an attachment from a stranger and or from a recruiter? They just wouldn't. And so, how to get attention via messaging is, well, don't rely on one message. Have a 3-message sequence that gets somebody to the point where they want to have a phone call with you. Yeah. And all that first message needs to be, it doesn't need to be longer than about 60 words, which is something like, hi, Ben, I'm working on an XYZ job that I think you might be interested in because benefit 1, benefit 2. Would you like some more info? 60 words. That's it. That becomes far more compelling And then somebody responds with yes or why not or okay, and that's all they have to do. They haven't got to give you their phone number, upload their CV, access your Calendly or any of that other bullshit. They just have to respond yes. And then once they've engaged. You've got an engaged potential candidate. Then, you can pretty much send them whatever you want in the second message. And then in the third message, you can ask for the close, which is to get them on the phone or to get their CV or to whatever else. I mean, you probably don't need their CV because if you're sending them a message, you've already looked at their profile and determined that they might be a suitable candidate. So it's
Yeah, and that's a long and nebulous and a conversation for another time. Is the role of CVs in recruitment in the days of social media profiles.
Standing out in your sector is becoming harder than ever. Lots of people are making noise, saturating the market with the same old droll tones. So if you want to stand out, it's time to start a podcast. Yes, there's loads of podcasts out there, but how many of them are actually in your niche? Do any of them speak to your perspective on the market? I didn't think so. Podcasting not only sets you apart as an innovative thinker in your market, it is great content for repurposing. Here at SearchStat, we help you become the voice of your industry. We can stretch your content and turn it into a content goldmine, leveling up your personal brands and recruitment marketing in the process. Sounds good, doesn't it? Well, to find out more, head over to searchstat.co.uk/podcasts.
But yeah, I think that's such a good point, particularly in terms of that way of thinking about outreach messaging and lining it up. And we had in the last series of podcasts, we had Will Allred from Lavender on the show, who's talking about the impact, the data that they have around the impact of messages that are, in fact, emails that are over 70 words, and the negative impact that has on reply rate is absolutely huge. Yeah. On LinkedIn, in a DM, the word count is even smaller to get a reply, particularly because of the amounts of spam that are out there. If you can convey in 4 sentences or 3 sentences that you're somebody worth engaging with, then, as you say, the person you're speaking to volunteers for the conversation, and then you can have the conversation. What we kind of, I think, lose perhaps is that the first message is about getting the person to volunteer to have the conversation. It's not the start of the conversation. It's like walking up to somebody in the street and starting to try and talk to them about something. We can't do that. We wouldn't try to do that. We go and we have an icebreaker and then we start
exactly
the dialogue.
Yeah, it's a long way between saying hello to someone and going for a beer with them. Absolutely.
Exactly. Good. And this brings us also back to then the role of a job brief. There is a piece that we're not going to have time to explore in more detail today around buyer centricity and around putting yourself in your candidate's shoes. I may try and come back to it. But I want to spend the remaining time we have, next 5 minutes or so, just talking about why the role briefing, the job briefing, whatever you call it, is so central to being able to write good copy.
Right. Well, it's absolutely imperative. And thinking about it now, I'm amazed that I didn't produce this training course on taking a job brief 2 years ago, because I was already, because a lot of what prompted it was the work I've done with recruiters over the last 8 years, really, which is when we launched the copywriting thing, particularly since we took it online, because that changed the dynamic of how people learn, which is another topic we won't get into. But it became apparent that a lot of job ads that could have been better, that I was reviewing as part of the one-to-one coaching process that I was doing with each recruiter, was heavily related to the fact they hadn't got good enough information. And it was either because they hadn't taken a job brief and were working off the job description, and therefore they couldn't go beyond selling the job other than adding adjectives. This is great, you're going to love this is exciting, but without telling the reader why. Or they just hadn't asked the right questions. But I've worked in other forms of advertising. I've worked with well-known ad agencies a couple of times and gone through the process with them in terms of being able to create an ad campaign for a client. And the research and the discovery element of it was 50%, maybe 40% of the total time taken. So, within the sort of miniature world of recruitment, it's absolutely critical. You can't sell anything unless you know what it is you're selling or what it is you've got to sell. Because if you don't have that, then you're in the world of making shit up, basically.
Yeah. We've all, I think probably a fair few recruiters listening to this will maybe reflect with some humility, as I do. I'll be the first to admit that that's certainly been the case when I've written job adverts in the past. So
yeah, now there are some politics around taking a job brief in terms of the first one is, do you have access to the hiring manager? Agency recruiters will have more problems with that than internal recruiters, but equally there are some that feel somewhat intimidated by some hiring managers because they know a lot more than they do about the job. Well, obviously, but one area of expertise that they can bring to that meeting is knowledge on how to sell the job. Because I've met in my entire life, and I've been in recruitment now for 33 years. I might be wrong by one or two, but I think I've met 3 hiring managers in my life who knew how to sell a job. Seriously. 3, maybe 4, out of hundreds and hundreds and hundreds. And it's not that difficult a thing to learn. And if you can take that into the meeting, that will then really turbocharge how you take that brief, the kind of questions you ask, and questions that the hiring manager will be impressed by because they won't have been asked it before.
Yeah, right. Have you got any particular examples that you like?
The big one, the one that opens the door is, well, I have a 2-question approach, and I've been using this particularly now, and it evolved over time, but in the format I'm about to give it to you, I've been using this for about 15 years. So when I get to the part of the briefing conversation that I'm having with the hiring manager, bearing in mind these conversations take at least an hour with me because I've for the last 21 years I've been only working retained. So they're invested because they're spending money up front. They go, right, I'm going to pretty much do what he tells me to do because that's, I tell them what the process is. And so they know they're there for an hour. When I get to the part of that hour where I want to find out about how we're going to sell the job, I ask the hiring manager 2 questions. So the first question I ask is the person we're looking for likely to currently be employed or unemployed? And that sounds like a dumb question. And to some extent it is because it's a trick question. And I know that 19 times out of 20, the hiring manager is going to say employed. Yeah. And they'll say that either because they've got their finger on the pulse and they know that particular category of job isn't overwhelmed with lots of people that are on the market, or there aren't just that many of them in period, or they're biased against unemployed people for whatever reason. They just think unemployed people, they must be unemployed for a reason, therefore they're not any good, therefore I don't want to hire them. Whatever it is, they'll say unemployed, which then walks them through into my next question, which is, so why would somebody who's in a job that they don't need to leave want to quit that job to come and do this one? And that's the $64 million question. And that's the one that once you ask it, you have to shut up and wait for the other person to speak. But that's the gateway to then a whole series of follow-up questions. Yeah. So because, the dumbest answer I've had to that question is, we're a market leader. I've quite a few hiring managers there. Okay. So you're a market leader, not the market leader. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. By the way, who is the market leader? I sometimes say that with a little twinkle in my eye just to wind them up a little bit. But the follow-up question is, what is it about you being a market leader that's going to make this particular job more rewarding and more interesting?
Love it.
And most can't answer it. So we say, well, look, and then I say, look, we need to give these people reasons to do one of the most stressful things that any of us will ever do in our lifetime, which is change jobs. It's right up there with public speaking, getting married, all that kind of stuff that causes people stress. Why would we expect them to willingly walk into that process without them having good reason to do so? Once I give them that speech, they get it. So what is it? And then we start getting into things like training and more autonomy or control over who you hire or better tech or better environment or whatever. There's 100 things it could be. And you just need to find 2 or 3. It's not hard.
Yeah,
there's always something. And the other the other end of those scales. So on one part of the scales, you've got the reasons why somebody might want the job. But if those are few and far between, or the company are struggling to come up with valid things, then you've got to change the person spec. Because if somebody's not going to make a sideways move to do this job over the one that they're doing, then we need someone who's going to make either a career change or an upward move. So you've got to start fishing for people for whom that job would be a step up. And those are some of the easiest jobs in the world to sell. You just have to get the kind of the SEO part of it right and the job title right, so that you can actually get enough people finding it. But yeah, it's if the candidate profile is realistic, you've got to sell the job. But if it's not, then you've got to change the candidate profile and think, well, do they really need 10 years experience? Do they really need to know all of these coding languages? And so on and so on.
And this is, and just to kind of just double down on a couple of your points there are three things that in particular stood out to me about what you were sharing around job briefing. Firstly, research, right? The amount of research that goes into a typical advertising campaign. When we think about how many recruiters today are still struggling with real candidate scarcity, real issues around generating and engaging talent, and actually building talent communities, which I think is this era's kind of biggest challenge, is how do you gain and build a sustained audience of people who are listening to you, as we discussed earlier, even when they're not looking for a role. So we're looking at that research piece, and we're thinking, how many job adverts does a recruiter read on a daily or weekly basis? How do they compare them? And when they go to the employer they're taking the job brief from, how are they sharing that information? Are they saying, look, this is how the 4 competitors who are currently recruiting the exact same role are displaying it? How do you think we should display yours? Creates a nice starting point. So research. You then touched on that emotional change, right? So taking a new job or moving roles, as you say, is not only one of the most the biggest kind of changes we make, but really intimidating and scary, because unlike getting married, which you do to typically somebody you've already met or spent some time with before, or buying a house, which that's probably actually a bit scary too, but certainly the first time, but you need somewhere to live. But with a job, it's like, oh my God, there's all these people I don't know, all these things. Like I could get fired, I could let people down, or maybe I'm not as good. I'm trying to oversell myself, whatever that looks like. That emotional shift is huge.
And what you've just said is actually a counter argument, and a valid one, to all of the posts that we've both seen over the years, where mostly recruiters, but also candidates, are complaining about the length of the process or the amount of stages that are involved. Yeah. And I think if someone is seriously considering moving from a secure job to a new job, they need as much information as possible to make that decision. And often that involves not only talking to the hiring manager and maybe one of the directors, but also other people doing that job in that department as well.
Do we know, has anyone done the study on the difference between people's frustration with the length of the process, but with groups based on the successful or the hired candidate, the future employee, versus the other candidates? Because I wonder if actually what we're seeing is people get frustrated with the process, sure, but the reason they get frustrated with the process, just like and the reality is that the person who took the job was like, no, I loved meeting everybody along the way. I loved having all those conversations. I found it really useful to be engaged. Of course, that person is probably, certainly a small percentage of the people who originally applied for the role, and maybe a small percentage of the number of candidates who were taken through the entire process. But the person who ended up, the person that, our target audience, your target reader, that individual was always motivated through the process, and they didn't mind it being so long. I don't know. That's just a hypothesis, and I'm sure that the truth isn't quite exactly there, but it does make you wonder, right?
The truth is always nuanced and will vary depending on the context of each situation, because recruitment can change ever so slightly each time depending on the company, the geography, the type of job discipline, and so on and so on. I think also we shouldn't get too bogged down with time, how long it takes from start to finish, and perhaps focus more on how many touch points there are. You can have 5 or 6 touch points and you can achieve that in 2 weeks, 3 weeks. It doesn't have to take 2 months. And to answer your question, I don't know if there are any studies out there that have measured that, but I don't see why there couldn't be a study that measures the impact on how robust the selection process was, because it's a two-way selection process. The candidate is also selecting the employer.
Yeah.
Particularly if they're looking at other jobs and or are in a job themselves already that they are not desperate to leave. And I wonder what the correlation is between touch points and length of stay once the person gets hired. I would bet money that the more touch points there are, the more the more insight the candidate can get about the job and the company, and then makes the decision yes to join. I think they're far more likely to stay longer.
Well, that's right. We know certainly that higher levels of engagement in the first 90 days lead to greater impact, greater long-term engagement, greater retention, and more success in the role. So it makes sense that, and I've always been a big champion for this, that candidate experience feeds into that first 90 days, and that engagement piece really starts from your first piece of comms, which takes us full cycle, Mitch, the way back to how we create an advert, how we engage candidates, how we capture their attention and their imagination at the start of the process. And I think this will become a really valuable resource for everybody listening to it in how to kind of navigate that journey. Is there anything that you'd like to add? Anything I haven't asked you that you wish I had, or anything we haven't touched on that you think we should?
Nope.
Cool. Great. Well, in that case, we've done a good job, right? It's been a great session, really, really enjoyable conversation. I'm super grateful for you to coming on. Part of the key driver here is because we wanted to get the word out about your new course. Everyone knows you as the king of copywriting and recruitment, but your new course is specifically focused on the job brief, and we'll make sure that there's a link to your website and a link to the course in the show notes. So everyone listening has got access to that. It's available
to buy now, as it's on the site, and there's a buy button. I haven't determined the final price yet. There's a price on it, but I think I'm probably going to put it up. But it's being beta tested at the moment, and I'm halfway through that process. And then, I'm not going to start publicly promoting it until January. So anyone listening to this will know it's there, and if they want to go and buy it, they can. Some people have already bought it because they found it. But yeah, it's what I would call it's a mini course. So whereas the copywriting course takes 3 hours to do, this takes about an hour. So it's almost, you could do it in your lunch hour.
Great. Well, in that case, I would strongly recommend that everybody jumps on the link right now, grabs the opportunity of an early price while it still lasts, and reach out to Mitch and get in touch for access to that. So, Mitch, thanks so much for coming on the show. Genuinely, really enjoyed the conversation, and I will be happy to point everybody in your direction and pass on the feedback we get, because I know people are going to be coming back to me saying how much they've taken from this episode. So thank you.
Cool. Thanks, Ben. Good talking to you. Good to meet you for the first time. I think this is the first time we've seen each other, isn't it?
Yeah, indeed. Yeah. It is.
Okay. All right. Listen, have a great day. Thanks a lot.
Just one last thing from me. I hope you enjoyed the show. If you did, hit like, hit follow, and consider leaving a review. Your feedback is really greatly appreciated. We're still looking to perfect the format and to think about how we can make this show even more valuable for all of our audience. So as you leave feedback, we pick it up and we'll be including it in everything we do going forwards. And if you want to get closer to the show, to ask me questions or hear about upcoming guests and put questions to them, then head to the show notes where you'll find a link to the Recruiting Better community. From there, you'll be able to get our newsletter with regular updates and send me any messages or feedback that you want me to receive.